Bill Gates just shook the entire global climate debate. He has talked about that maybe we are fighting a wrong fight and the climate change is not going to end human civilization as we are very resilient. So what is this new perspective or climate perspective that he has brought in the memo that he published just in the October 2025, and how his recent stance seems to be a clear shift from the mitigation based approach to adaptation based approach? This is what we are trying to decode and uncover in this particular video. Now, the biggest question that Bill Gates has asked about is the concept of doomsday that seem to be highlighted whenever we talk about the climate change and climate change related debate, that how due to anthropogenic greenhouse gas emission a possibility will arise in future where the entire human race might vanish. This is what you can call as doomsday, because the entire planet Earth will become inhabitable in nature. Now, Bill Gates has questioned this particular narrative and he even has criticized this narrative. On the other hand, he has talked about that rather than focused upon this particular narrative building, government should focus on development and should focus on ensuring adaptation measure. Adaptation measure here means that climate change is going to be a reality. Now, how we are able to basically manage this climate change, how we are able to tackle this, that is what you can call as adaptation as first. Mitigation, on the other hand, is the earlier approach that he was advocating, where the focus should be on reducing greenhouse gas emission and to overall curb the intensity of climate change itself. So from that, now we are shifted to adaptation measure. This has triggered a global scientific debate where many scholars have come in his support, while many of them have criticized this approach of Gates itself. Now, if you look at the entire background of the debate itself, the question he has asked about is the obsession that climate activists and the climate governance model has related to the temperature target. As we know that in the Paris summit, it was agreed that the entire world would try to ensure that global average climate or temperature does not go beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius or even 2 degrees Celsius by the year 2100. At the same time, Gates has said that such kind of target is unmeetable in nature, and rather than ensuring that we are meeting the target, our focus should be to ensure the healthcare needs of people are well met, to ensure that people become and the countries themselves become prosperous in the nature, and because of the better healthcare and greater prosperity, it will automatically build a resilience among the population who can then adjust against any kind of climate change that will happen in future. Again, we have discussed debate itself is about mitigation. That means take steps to curb the climate change versus adaptation. That means to take steps to ensure that you are well adjusted and well adapted to the climate change related phenomena. The Gates, as you know, Gates organization talk about, Gates Foundation talk about, was and has been one of the major funder of the climate change related initiatives. So because of this, his viewpoint has a strong influence, because many other donors we talk about, many other people who talk about, they focus upon what Bill Gates is saying, and that is why it will have a major policy impact not only again in US but throughout the entire world as such. Now, Gates has given three main arguments as far as this particular memo is concerned. In first argument, he has talked about that climate change, whenever we discuss about it, does not necessarily mean existential threat. No matter what kind of changes we witness in the coming decades, humanity will survive. That is the first argument. Second, he says that temperature target is not the only solution. That means we cannot just give target to the entire countries and world that will not increase temperature or will ensure the temperature of the world does not rise beyond 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. That is not the only solution. Third solution, best defense that we have in our hand is the development. Again, same thing, healthcare, agriculture, infrastructure development, as well as focusing upon early warning system as such. And by doing so, you'll be able to strengthen resilience and not only reduce emission. And this is the best way forward as far as the fight against climate change is concerned. Now, it has drawn sharp criticism and reaction from the scientific community. For example, Michael Mann has stated that this particular view of Bill Gates is deeply misguided. He cannot just reboot the entire planet. Similarly, Catherine Hayhoe stated that climate change you're talking about, or any changes taking place in climate or the atmosphere as such, is not a separate problem. It is not a hole in the every bucket. Rather, it is the entire bucket itself. Also, many of the critics have argued that such stance by Bill Gates also emboldened the stance taken by Trump and his supporters, where he has completely denied any kind of climate change, and he has talked about this entire climate change is nothing but a hoax. So such kind of voices also will now be emboldened. They will be able to basically justify their stand, and Trump already has stated that we have won the climate war as such. So all this kind of negativity we can see further spreading and will impact the climate change policies at the global scale. So there is a fear that Gates' remark may weaken urgency of emission cuts, and there is risk that there might be a misuse of such a statement by climate denialists. Climate denialists means people who deny that climate change is going to take place and it is going to have significant impact on the life of people as such. Now, as far as the rationale behind Gates, if it is concerned, it is because of the emission cutting efforts seems to be failing continuously globally. As we have discussed that by 2100 in the Paris summit, we have decided that we should ensure that global temperature rise does not go or does not rise beyond 2 degrees Celsius. This is only possible if we are able to reduce the greenhouse gas emission intensity by at least 45%. If you look really, it is quite possible that we might not be able to even reduce it by 5 to 10% as such. That means this target that we have given to ourselves is most probably going to fail. Second is global emission is rising despite Paris goals. So we have to cut the emission, but at the same time global emission seems to be rising as such. This might have caused Bill Gates to shift his priority, shift his approach. Plus, if you look at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, its sixth report, it clearly states that we need 43% cut by 2030. This is highly unlikely and impossible to meet. Even zero emissions now, if you are able to do so, just theoretically, if you consider that if suppose we suddenly turn off entire greenhouse gas emission sources, even in those cases, we will not get any immediate relief because carbon dioxide already is present in the atmosphere, and for decades and decades, its impact will be felt as such. So that is why the reason why he has focused upon the mitigation effort rather than focusing on mitigation effort is that he has talked about adaptation as it offer immediate as well as local benefit as such. This might be the reason behind the change in approach. If we talk about adaptation, it also seems to be having or adding a practical advantage. For example, in adaptation, we focus on early warning systems. Early warning systems are able to help save a lot of life as people can be evacuated from the areas where natural disaster is going to strike, largely because of climate change. It can be GLOF-like event, it can be cyclonic events, it can be landslide-like event. Second, due to better health infrastructure and agriculture, that is the focus area on adaptation, people also have better ability, or we can say that the ability increases, or governments can make them enable to tackle the climate change like effect as such. And this also is something that suits the narrative of developing countries, because developing countries still are in the are still not very developed. That means they need to develop at a faster rate, and they can only develop at faster rate if they are able to industrialize. And the only way to industrialize even now is to focus or is to depend upon the fossil fuels as such. If we talk about the climate finance also, this does not have any significant impact, because till now less than 20% of climate finance goes to adaptation as such, and most of them is focused upon mitigation. That is why this approach will also ensure that funding is diverted to the areas which will provide immediate benefit to the local population. Interestingly, it also aligns with India's position. Few years back, India has clearly stated that focusing upon mitigation measure is not the right way, or turning off completely greenhouse gas emission, restricting is not a right way. And this we have seen in the economic survey being published by Government of India in 2024, where they have stated that temperature thresholds are the flawed approach. Second, it has advocated growth and income rise as the best insurance to fight against climate change, and now something same is being heard by the Bill Gates also. Criticized also, India has criticized global policy for downgrading developmental goals, and it has called for policy space for developing nations to grow, because developed countries obviously automatically they have gone to that extent where they can now focus on the mitigation measure. But for developing country, adaptation measures are something that would not hurt the economy also while fighting or while resisting the climate change. We can take here the example of China as well, where China focused on the prosperity first approach. For example, in mid 1990s now, if you look, emission intensity rose by almost 4 times. This has led to growth and increase in the technical capacity. China then became a world leader in renewable deployment, and now because of this particular situation, it is able to decarbonize rapidly. Why? Because it has built capacity. For example, electric vehicles we talk about, or production of EV when we talk about, you need to have proper infrastructure to support it as such. But China is able to do so because it has first focused on the ensuring and increasing the prosperity of its citizens and people as such. So this model also validates Gates and both India's development first logic, and that also is something that is reflected in the recent memo as such. Now, implications obviously are going to be seen as far as the Gates viewpoint is concerned. It provides certain opportunity, first of all, because we know that it can reshape funding priorities. Adaptation projects which were largely neglected will now gain traction, not only from Gates Foundation but also from other donors, we can say. Apart from that, encourages pragmatic realism in climate policy. Rather than giving us some target which can never be met, we will now focus on realistic approach how to tackle and deal with the climate change. Second, we can say it will also strengthen developing countries' stance in overall global climate talks. And risk obviously we can associate is of because of potential slowdown in emission urgency, and this again can have a cataclysmic effect, if not in the recent future, then in the distant future. So this is all something that we have taken into account when we are engaging in debate between adaptation versus mitigation. So that's all about this video. If you like the video, please hit the like button, share it with the aspirants, and subscribe to the channel for more useful content. Thank you.